Here we are, welcome back. A long time coming. Video number 1 of the MotorFab channel suspension tech series. It's a lot of information, as I say all the time. Every time in little videos I try to touch on it and I try to tell you a little bit, and there's just too much to say. So we're just going to make a continual series that runs on and on and on. It's a lot of my secrets and a lot of stuff I've worked really hard to develop and learn over the years. So I hope you guys appreciate me sharing that. But you guys have stuck with us since day one, and so much fun stuff and all the builds and all the things we've done and lack of uploads and all that sort of stuff. You guys have stuck around. The audience is still growing. Thank you to everyone who subscribes. So please enjoy this suspension series. We're going to put a lot of work into it. This first video is 5 reasons why you're probably spinning the tires. Enjoy, get in there, comment, tell me about your experiences, tell me how your knowledge and experience differs. I'm always loving learning. So let's do it. Let's get into it. Okay, so front suspension. It's all in the front. 3 reasons why your front suspension is going to cause you to spin the wheels, break traction, lose races. 1, separates too quickly. 2, separates too slowly. 3, too much stored energy. Let's look at number 1. The rear shock of the car has to separate to plant the tire. We're going to deal mainly in separation. There's some old school stuff, squatting. We're not even going to go there. 9 times out of 10 in any form of racing these days, you're trying to plant the tire, you're trying to push the tire to the ground. So the rear has to go and extend. If the rear gets to full extension, the tire is going to spin. It does not like the shock being solid and fully extended all the way out. The front, on the other hand, has to extend, and if the front tire comes off the ground, it's going to extend to full extension. There's nothing you can do about that. So you've got to control where that happens during the pass and where that happens in relation to the rear extending. So if the front fully extends too quickly, the car's going to bunny hop and bounce, and when it bunny hops, it unloads the rear and the rear tires will spin. So that's too fast. If we go too quick, the front's going to bounce up real quick before the back's got its chance to do its thing and plant the tire, and then the back is going to unload and spin. If it separates too slowly, the rear is going to extend, the front's not going to do anything. It's like a wheelbarrow. It's just going to lean forward and spin the tire. So we slow the front down to stop wheelies, but if we're not getting enough bite and we're not getting any traction, we need to loosen the front up and let it lift up a little faster. So we need to find a balance in between too fast and too slow for the front. Now, too much stored energy, number 3. This is a big one. We're going to show you a lot of videos of the Monaro because it has this problem. It has a stock standard front end in it, and you can't have the spring without stored energy because it would fall out of the car. So the spring in the Monaro is captive in there, and when the front end is fully drooped down, there is still pressure against the control arm. Now, I guess it seems pretty straightforward. When you push the control arm down with a spring, when it gets to a solid stop of the shock, it's a jolt. It's like hitting the front of the car down with a hammer, and it's quite aggressive. If you were to hold that thing, put that thing on a lift, hold the suspension with a clamp, and then just let go of it in a split second, those wheels are going to slam down so hard, it'll rock the car. And that's exactly what happens. As the front end of the car comes up off the ground, the front slams down to full extension and it rocks the car and it unloads the back. Now, cars with standard front suspension or cars where you're trying to chase a ride height and you've got to run tension on the spring when it's unladen, it causes you a problem. It's much better with a coilover front strut where as the thing separates all the way down, the spring actually becomes loose before the shock tops out. That's going to make your life a lot easier if you can achieve that. So here's our front shock. If when the suspension is all the way down, this distance here is at its maximum, if there is still pressure on that spring trying to push the shock further than it can go, that's when you're going to have that effect when the control arm drops down. Bang! It's going to shock the car when the front wheels are in the air, and it's going to unload the car. You can get around it if you have to, like we do in the Monaro, but it's if we can set it up better and not have that issue, it's much better. So ideally, you want that spring to be loose when the shock is at full extension, and getting your spring height and rate is how you get your ride height where you want it and still being able to achieve that goal. Also your mounting of where you mount the thing in the car with the heights. So if you're building something and you have the flexibility to do that, definitely make sure that that is achievable in your setup. Right, we're ready for a big pass here. Look what happened. We leave hard, tire crinkles up, front is rising, and then just as the front leaves the ground, the rear completely uncrinkles. There's no planning of the tire anymore, and so it spins, shakes, ruins the pass. It's all slow from there on in. You got to look really closely for this one. Michael Arnold's Dude makes a lot of power on a little 235 tire. It's very short front suspension travel, being a radial car. And just here, right there, as the front tops out the suspension, the back lets go. It never picks the tire up off the ground because just as it reaches full extension, the rear tire spins and it never gets the transfer and all of the weight on the back because of the stored energy in the front spring. Here's another one of my Monaro. It does it a lot because it's running the stock front suspension, so you can't not have stored energy on the front spring, otherwise the springs will fall out. But there it goes, it lifts up. Just as the front tires come up, the back uncrinkles, and then it just lights the back tires up. And it doesn't go anywhere from there, not fast anyway. So on this day we managed to get around it, and the way we did that, I had to turn the second kit on after we'd gotten through the whole bubble of the front tire unloading and unloading the back. You see it very momentarily unloads the back in this one, but then we turn the second kit on. It's a big risk of doing a huge wheelie doing that, but I put a timing ramp in, and it's just a limitation of the car then, which is actually the front end, which most people would think is the rear. But you'll see the tire stays crinkled, momentarily becomes uncrinkled, but then crinkles again and stays with the front wheels in the air and continues to accelerate. Number 2, deforming the tire. So here's our tire front on, here's our tire from the side. What happens, you will talk a lot in this video about tire crinkle. You will see lines form as the rim is trying to rotate this way, the ground is stopping the tire, it starts twisting the tire up. That's great, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the right amount of load on the sidewall of the tire, which means we're getting the most acceleration available out of that track. Now what happens when we push a little bit too far, we get one big crinkle. We get other crinkles as well, but we start to get one big fold in the tire, so to speak. And what happens when you fold that tire, the tire stays the same around the outside, but down the bottom, you're trying to pull it into a different shape, and it pulls it up off the ground. And so what happens, exaggerated, the tire does this. It tries to pull a middle, but the stiffest part of the tire is the corners, and so it doesn't want to deform, so it starts to pull the middle of the tire up, which does that. This part of the tire actually doesn't touch the ground once that starts to happen. And you get these little gray lines on the track where the tire is spinning and cleaning the track down, is pulling the rubber off the track on these outer edges of the tire, because it's just spinning on that little bit, and it spins, and it then turns into tire shake. Now, you also, when you see the tire shake, you'll see two lines like this, and then a bald spot, two lines, bald spot, two lines, bald spot, and that will repeat as far as you continue to shake the tires. The more power you have, the more violent that tire shake is going to become. Now, why that happens, as you load the tire up, then you load it too far, it forms a crinkle, it deforms, it spins on the outer edge. When it spins, now the load is gone that's causing the fold. Once the load disappears that caused the fold, it goes back into its normal shape. And then when it hits its normal shape, it grabs, and then it reforms the fold. It gets enough pressure on it that it wants to fold up again, and then it spins again. And it's just a cycle. It goes around and around and around, and it unloads itself, then creates load because it's been unloaded, then deforms the tire, and then spins again. And it happens very, very fast. And you'll see those lines on the track. We've got some great videos of that here to show you how that happens and what to look for. Our boy Stacey Gomez trying to make a pass in desperation. He leaves these 4 grey lines on the track. Now that's tire deformation. We're going to go to the whiteboard and show you how that all works. This little video here is the Monaro deforming the tire. There's not much explanation needed with this one. You can just see what's happening. The Monaro can really knock a tire out of shape sometimes. So, how do we fix the tire deformation? Sometimes there's a few things here, and it is in drag racing one of the most challenging things to conquer. A lot of times it's not enough pressure in the tire. Sometimes it's putting too much power to the tire. Sometimes it's not putting enough to the tire. This is one of those things that is definitely sweet spot. You got to have the pressure right. You've got to have the temperature of the tire right after you burn out, nice and sticky, and you've got to have the power right and the suspension right to take the most of that. So when all those things come together, your tire's going to do what it wants to do. If you're starting to get a deforming tire, you're moving in the right direction. You're putting a lot of load on that tire. So then mess around with pressures. Mess around a little bit more power, a little bit less power. You're getting to close to the sweet spot if you're at this point now. Yes, very wild ride for this one, but let's go back to the start line. As Stacey lets go of the button, you'll see that the rear rim doesn't separate from the body of the car. Now, on a crazy track like that, you probably wouldn't put more power in, but you're definitely loosening the shock to get that to plant the tire harder. Once it planted the tire, would ramp the power in smoother. But it all comes back to the tire didn't get hit downward force enough. Here we are with my ute. Let go of the button, and it looks like it belts the tire. There's a ton of power in there, but the shocks are very tight. It starts to separate there, but after the car's tried to move, so it knocks the tire off because the rim didn't separate from the body of the car initially on the hit to plant the tire correctly. So you see this one, same day, same car, same track. It's a little closer this time. It almost hooks. Now what I did here was I just loosened the shocks off just a smidgy just to try to get it to bite. And it wasn't quite enough. Third time's a charm. All I did was added more power and it plants the tire beautifully. It really smacks that tire down. The front tire comes up just off the ground and you see it just hovers there and it gets down beautifully. Absolutely textbook, perfect way to leave the start line, and it just hit the sweet spot just right then. Switch the car over to no prep, 28.10.5, absolutely terrible track. Start the day not hitting it very hard and just could not get down. Turn around, put more power in, look at that, down we go, all the way down. Number 3, I think this one's my favorite one because it's probably the most common, is not enough. If you're not hitting the tire hard enough, it's gonna spin. And the problem with that is a lot of people go out there and then they go and they spin and they go, wow, I've got too much power. So they start pulling more and more power out and they spin more and more and more and they never fix the problem. And it's really great when you work with someone and you say, just belt the thing. Just go out there and just smash it and see what happens. And then bang, it hits, it goes down the track. And it's the most fun one because you weren't expecting it. And it's also great because you're going to go faster if you're putting more power in. So let's have a look at it. This is our car, the bits that matter for now. We've got an X-axis and a Y-axis. X and Y. I'm sure if you were scientific enough, you could figure out that the force here, the tire rotation to turn, to drive the car forward is this way, which creates drive this way. And the suspension activating on the car and pushing the tire down to the ground in the Y-axis, if there would be an equation, there would be a number, I'm sure someone will figure out one day. But if you have too much X not enough Y, it's not going to go, it's not going to stick. So the tire, as we've showed you in a lot of these videos, the tire needs to plant to the ground. You need a Y, force downward, to be able to put X. Now your engine, your horsepower, how much power you are trying to turn that tire with to accelerate that car is your X. If you don't have enough Y, enough going down, it's just going to spin. So it's a combination. Now, the biggest thing with that is this shock, and what we spoke about before, the extension of that shock. A lot of times we have a shock sensor, we can measure that, we can monitor that, we can data log that. We need to be pushing that down to get this to happen. If we push that to full extension, as I mentioned earlier, it's gonna spin every time. So we don't want to get to full extension, but we need to continue to push that down. We need to hit it hard at the initial hit, and then we need to continually separate as we move out. Now, if we hit it too hard, we go back to what we just spoke about, which is wrinkling up the sidewall too far. So too much power. We're hitting the thing too hard, and then it's deforming the tire. So we can't go too far and deform a tire, and we can't go not far enough and just spin, because we're not putting enough Y force down for the amount of X force that we're putting down. So that's a combination that takes a little bit of time to get right. How much RPM, how much boost, how much timing are you going to leave with? And then the critical part, the shock setting. If you have, let's just say we're leaving at 500 horsepower on the button at that RPM and that boost and that timing, or that much nitrous, whatever it might be that's achieving you 500 horsepower getting transferred directly to that tire, if it doesn't separate at all, well, you could put more power to it, and then the torque force will push it down, or you can loosen the shock off, and because it's the shock that's fighting it from going down. So it's about finding a combination of between horsepower and the shock setting. So let the diff go down away from the car and separate the tire to the ground. We don't want to let it hit too hard, which we'll get to in a minute, but we've got to get that sweet spot again just right, the right power. So once you have a car dialed in and you know that if I leave at 4,000 RPM, I leave on shock setting 12. Don't put those numbers in your car. I'm just using those numbers as round numbers. Then I know if I leave at 4,800 RPM, I need to leave on shock setting 18. The more power you put to the leave, the more shock you have to help resist that, so it doesn't just go full extension. Now, you might leave at 3,200 RPM because you think the track's not great, but you might leave your shock still set on 12, and it's not going to work because that shock setting is for more power. So you're going to have to reduce the shock extension and let the shock plant the tire. So not enough. You got to hit it hard enough. If you're not seeing the rim separate away from the body of the car and planting the tire, you're not hitting it hard enough. So hit it harder. Don't pull power out, put power in. Have fun. Now, at first glance, this looks like it just goes absolutely nowhere. But you slow it down, zoom it in, and have a close look at it. The car does everything right. It plants the tire really well, really hard, and then it continues to separate. It does everything right. It's just too much power in there for that track. And it overpowers the track, and the rest is history. Put a little power out of this thing, and then down it goes, and it is fast. Number 4, too much, too many, you've gone too far. It's just the opposite of number 3, not enough. When you put too much in, you're going to deform the tire, you're going to overextend the shock, or you're just going to blaze the tires. But there's a whole heap of other things we've just gone through that everyone is going to blame this on first, but this is rarely the case. And the way to help you resist from pulling power out and trying to get a tire to hit when you think that that's a problem is to look and go, well, there's other cars here at the track tonight going way faster than I am with the same tire. If they're doing it, you can do it too. So stick with the big power setting. Try to tweak your suspension, try to tweak your ramps and stuff like that. Try to look at your front suspension, look at your rear suspension, look at your tire deformation. Look at all those things first before you say, it's just too much power for the track. The track's not there. The track's no good tonight. All of those things, that's what you say when you're going slow. So if you really want to go fast, you want to lead with a lot of power, and you want to figure out the ways to get that power to the ground. Now there comes a point when you just deform a tire. You go up on pressure, down on pressure. The tire just wants to deform, or if you go too much pressure, it spins. And the main characteristic you're going to see when you get to too much is your shock is going to be maxed out. You're going to have the valving of the shock all the way at the maximum, and you're still going to be overextending the shock. That's when you got too much. If your shock's on a maximum setting and you're not topping them out, it's not too much. You've got another problem. One of the other problems we've spoken about earlier in this video. Look at those first before you blame this one. This is the one that you want to adjust. And this is the one you want to keep putting more and more and more, and find those ways of those other aspects to be able to get this much power that you want to get down the track. That y-axis, that x-axis, you want to go as big as you can on X. You've got to generate the Y. When the shock is topped out, you've controlled all the Y force that you can, all the downward acceleration caused by the suspension activating. When the shock's topped out and it's going all the way to the end, it's the power that creates the force that pushes the shock open. You're going to need bigger shocks, better valving, or you're going to have to turn it down a little bit. And that's when too much happens. See the guy in the yellow shirt there? He's forward. Come on, go forward. He's going to pull me forward some more. He's going to pull me forward some more. And he's finally stopped me there, which I'm way out of the water now. Bad chat. My crew guy is telling him, no, we're out of the water. We can't do a burn out of the water. The Norris set up for no prep street racing stuff. It's got too much grip to do a burnout on hot, dry rubber like that. So we couldn't get the burnout to happen. I tried everything. I turned the nitrous kits on every I can. But if your tire doesn't get up to that temperature and become sticky, it won't stick. And see here as we leave, it doesn't even try to go into the tire. Just not enough stick, not enough traction available. And when it does that, you're just wasting your time. So find out your burnout procedure, figure out what gets right, and stick to your guns and do what you got to do out there.